In the years that have brought us to the current state of national humiliation and great danger, our country has relied on secure resources and growing and finally so great that something very fundamental. We must have been doing too much wrong, so that all that money, instead of helping us take off for good, just vanished on us. What's the explanation? It's clear that there must be something fundamentally wrong with the development model we've been using.
While many Venezuelans enjoyed the oil-fueled party of bipartisan democracy, there were some voices that dared to be unpopular and warned about the serious collapse the nation was heading toward. One of these men was not only a prolific television host and incisive journalist, but also a true thinker. He left behind major intellectual works that resonated in Venezuela, Hispanic America, and Europe. We're talking about the Caracas native Carlos Rangel, who, in addition to all of the above, was a distinguished academic and diplomat, and although little is known, a politician. For a brief time, Carlos Rangel established himself as one of the main promoters of liberalism in the Spanish-speaking world in the 20th century, without ever ceasing in turn to study his particular national reality, and to promote in the mass media great reflections and teachings about economics, literature, sociology, history, political philosophy, and much more. His sudden departure from the earthly world shocked that Venezuela. Join us to learn about this exceptional life. This is Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches speaking. This is the New Encyclopedia, and I invite you to give us great support by liking this video and leaving your comments, which we always read. By turning on notifications with the bell, subscribing to the channel, of course, and sharing this material with all your contacts on WhatsApp, on social media, and anywhere else. So without anything else to add, let's start with today's story. Perhaps the first sign of this critical destiny for Rangel lies in his coming into the world. He was born in Caracas on September 17, 1929. Only a year after a group of young university students began the first movement of demonstrations against the government of Juan Vicente Gomez, that so-called generation of 28 whose young people were dominated by leftist ideas. It would ultimately be the country's political class that Rangel would confront, but not before approaching it and acknowledging its merits. In that provincial, non-metropolitan Caracas, he finished his primary and secondary studies. He witnessed the gradual democratic opening that took place from the government of Eleazar López Contreras up to the October coup that would give the presidency to Rómulo Betancourt. A member of an upper-middle-class family in the capital, Rangel left for the United States while still very young to settle in the vibrant life of mid-20th century New York. There, he earned his bachelor's degree in literature, learned and mastered the English language, and witnessed firsthand the growth of American capitalism. From New York, he headed to the old continent and settled in the vibrant Paris of that time, where he earned a certificate of studies at the University of La Sorbonne. Additionally, it is here, and in honor of the city, that Rangel marries for the first time to the American Barbara Barling, who would become the mother of his only 4 children. From Europe, having fully learned, the Frenchman returns to the United States and manages to complete a master's degree at New York University, where he was admitted as an instructor. This experience in North America and France will be vital in shaping his thinking, not only because of getting to know other cultures, but above all, because of the comparisons he could start to draw when he witnessed duty. His travels on both sides of the Atlantic took place while Venezuela was under the dictatorship of Marcos Pérez Jiménez, whose development Rangel was never able to witness firsthand. But the end of the dictatorship in 1958 brought new opportunities to the young academic. Well, just a few months after the provisional government junta was established, It asked him to take on the position of first secretary at the Venezuelan embassy in Brussels. He fits in well thanks to his French fluency. He would only repeat that experience as a diplomat once more in his life. At the government's request again, when he served as chief ambassador of the mission sent to the Dominican Republic for the third inauguration of President Joaquin Balaguer in the 1970s. The final arrival of democracy in 1959 with the election of Betancourt as president of the Republic also awakened an essential intention to participate in public life in that democracy, and a few months after his time in Brussels, he would settle in his hometown of Caracas, now for good. The 1960 capital city was unlike the one he left in the 1940s, with expanded infrastructure, a larger population, and increased urbanization, and with a political fervor that was fueled by the parties themselves. Carlos Rangel arrived in Venezuela as a more educated man. Arts, literature, and baseball, and with a natural talent for writing. A man whose distinct personality stood out among his acquaintances, as it would later in his television career. A calm, perceptive, sensible, discreet man, extremely intelligent and perhaps somewhat reserved in his body language, but very sharp, incisive, and passionate in his speech. His skillful writing earned him a place on the editorial board of Memento magazine, where he started a column that marked his controversial and critical path. From those pages, he began his nearly 30-year crusade defending the value of freedom. He initially did that work while teaching. In fact, in 1961, he joined the School of Journalism at the Central University of Venezuela as a professor to teach the subject that he would later put into practice throughout his life, opinion journalism. During this time, he also began his involvement with television, a medium that was just starting to expand enthusiastically in the country. It was also this environment that allowed him to connect with an exotic and passionate art lover, who over time would become his second wife and moreover his steadfast companion in life and work. This is, of course, the acclaimed Sofia Imbert. His work as a university professor soon comes to an end, and by 1963 he leaves teaching for good. His path would now take an abrupt turn as he enters the world of politics, but without neglecting his editorial work. In fact, a moment when he was able to combine both worlds was in October of that year, 1963, when he had the opportunity to be the moderator of a televised presidential debate on Radio Caracas Television, on that occasion between the candidates Rafael Caldera and Arturo Uslar Pietri. This also shows how quickly Carlos Rangel advanced in journalism and television. Even though, starting in the 1970s, Carlos Rangel would become a persistent critic of the Acción Democrática and COPEI governments. Before that, he was elected as a councilman of the federal district for Acción Democrática for the period from 1964 to 1968. In the Municipal Council of the capital, he even became vice president and later president of that body, a position that today would be equivalent to mayor. A very important aspect to keep in mind is that this side of Rangel as a politician revealed a man whose leadership surpassed his intellect. However, this very experience in the heart of national politics was perhaps one of the main experiences that had a deep impact on him. The conviction he would later show in questioning the Venezuelan political class, just as they reflected a man who was not willing or able to get involved in the intense dynamics of that world. On the other hand, it should not be overlooked that beyond his serious criticisms of democratic governments, Rangel always praised their political model of civil liberties, just as he always defended democracy as a form of government against other authoritarian paths. In fact, on more than one occasion, it was a source of joy for him how stable and energetic Venezuela's democratic process seemed to be, even with the bad policies of the governments when other countries in the region were going through autocratic periods. For this reason, it's not surprising, as he showed in his writings and speeches, that he had very favorable comments about certain democratic figures in the national scene, mostly due to their role, not the policies of their administrations. Going back to his time as a councilman, his departure from the municipal council also meant the end of his short political career. It was then the moment to definitively relaunch his work in the media, and for that, he firmly established himself in television.
19 years ago, Carlos Rangel and Sofia Invert de Rangel started a journalistic style. Today, they continue to be useful leaders for the nation, pillars of our democracy, and examples for the new generations. On their 19th anniversary, Benevision congratulates Carlos and Sofia, always with the news of the day.
In 1968, together with Sofia, Invert made his debut on the well-known morning show called Buenos Dias, originally broadcast by Radio Caracas Television, but later moved to Benevision during the 1970s. That would be Rangel's main showcase for the rest of his life, who, together with his wife, dedicated himself to conducting top-level interviews with a wide range of personalities, from musicians to writers, including politicians of all backgrounds. Some of the most prominent interviewees who appeared on his set over the years were former presidents Romulo Betancourt, Rafael Caldera, Jaime Lucinchi, Carlos Andrés Pérez, and former Argentine President Raúl Alfonsín. Writers Jorge Luis Borges, Mario Vargas Llosa, and José Ignacio Cabrujas, along with artists Carlos Cruz Diez, Carlos Raúl Villanueva, and Pedro León Zapata. We also can't leave out scientists Jacinto Convit and Humberto Fernández Morán. In addition, intellectuals and media figures like Arturo Uslar Pietri, Germán Carrera Damas, and the renowned Austrian philosopher Friedrich von Hayek, among many others. Through Buenos Dias broadcasts, Rangel and Sofia were also major pioneers in becoming independent producers in the country, and their private effort made the program one of the most important on Venezuelan television. With remarkable eloquence there, Rangel dedicated himself not only to interviewing, but also to presenting and contrasting his ideas with the guests, always showing his sanity, his excellent command of speech, and his natural elegance in delivering well-founded arguments without the passionate, noisy outbursts that unfortunately stood out in other figures of the country. Fully dedicated to his media work, Rangel also continued writing for newspapers and magazines. It is from this point on that he begins to take more dissonant and critical stances regarding the reality he saw in the country. In the midst of the greatest oil boom up to that time, he had to swim against the current. In a scenario where national political thought was dominated by social democracy, as well as by Marxism and the influence of the Cuban Revolution. A decisive episode in his career happened around those years, when he met the French intellectual Jean-François Rebel in Caracas, with whom he developed a great friendship, and who, as he recounts in his book Memoirs, had the opportunity in 1974 to read an article that Rangel had presented to him about the current situation in the American region. He was so immediately fascinated that Rebel encouraged him to develop the ideas more deeply in a manuscript under the promise that he would seek its publication in France. In this way, he reaches the peak of his intellectual work with traits of a sociologist, historian, and political scientist. When in 1976 his insightful work called From the Noble Savage to the Noble Revolutionary was published in Paris, a book that just a few months later would also be published in Venezuela. In this first major work, translated into Italian, English, French, German, and Portuguese, Rangel gives a clear analysis of the social and political reality of the American region based on the study of its past, and he exposes the inferiority complex that many Latin Americans feel even today toward the United States, seeing that power as the culprit for all their failures. The central premise is that the Native Americans, the noble savages, were stripped of their freedom by the colonizers, and for that reason, it was necessary for other Native men, the noble revolutionaries, to come and redeem them so they could return to the Edenic garden. The noble revolutionaries of that time were the members of the radical left who sought to transform the foundations of society. This historical interpretation in the context of the Cold War and with the intellectual dominance of the left in the country, it earned him the distinction of being one of the few Venezuelans, if not the only one, to be included in their ranks, having suffered the burning of one of his books in a public student event at the Central University of Venezuela. And
we began in the chain of our myths by attributing all our problems, everything we didn't like about our society, to the fact that we had been invaded and occupied for 300 years. A ridiculous thing, but that's how it was. That's another facet of the myth of the noble savage. The white criollos who break away from Spain immediately declare themselves heirs of the Incas and the Mayas and the Aztecs. Good savages who have shaken off the Spanish yoke. After 300 years of domination, we have regained independence. In Mexico, those terms are still used today, and there isn't a statue of Hernan Cortés. In Venezuela, are we less neurotic? Well, almost immediately, the United States begins to prosper and become powerful in a way that Bolívar perceived. Bolívar, who was the most intelligent of the South Americans, of the Hispanic Americans, he did perceive that there already was at that time in 1825 a great power.
Curiously, maybe as a twist of fate, this publication comes just a few months after Carlos Andrés Pérez took the lead in nationalizing oil exploitation in Venezuela during one of the most wasteful and extravagant governments in Venezuelan history. Throughout its pages, you can see the influence of some writers and philosophers he had read during his time outside the country. Francis Friedrich Hayek, José Ortega y Gasset, Karl Popper, Jorge Luis Borges, and Arturo Uslar Pietri, with whom, in fact, he had close contact throughout his life. Furthermore, it is here where he presents one of the two central pillars of his thought: reasoned criticism, especially towards the Soviet Union, the Cuban Revolution, the figure of Fidel Castro, the currents of socialism, populism, and Third Worldism. To offer sharp, insightful critiques of these paradigms in 1970s Venezuela meant clashing with much of the academic and intellectual world. However, Rangel did not present these ideas solely in his book. He had already published similar texts in the press. He devoted numerous articles to questioning state nationalism intervention, as well as the excessive government spending. He was among the few visionaries who warned, during a period of intense state worship and celebration with public subsidies, about the excessive influence that the state and politics were gaining in the lives of citizens and the terrible consequences that this would bring for civil society. And furthermore, in his writings, he was always a staunch critic of both insurrectional and democratic leftists, the latter mainly represented by M.A.S. and Teodoro Pekov. This 1976 book was a turning point in Rangel's career because it sparked a discussion in key circles nationwide and across the continent. He had written for national newspapers and magazines like El Nacional and El Universal, but now his essays and articles were being requested globally. Periodicals such as Newsweek International and Wall Street Journal from the United States, as well as Commentaire and Politica International from France, like Mexico's Vuelta magazine. They became showcases for the texts that Rangel wrote about politics and economics. In this way, sealing Venezuelan influence beyond its borders. None of this ever distracted him from working with Sofia Imbert, his partner since 1974, in the creation of the Caracas Museum of Contemporary Art, where he was an alternate member of the board of directors. Around this time, he also began with her what would be his last publishing project, the creation of the magazine Auténtico, with which they sought to emulate a French publication that fascinated Carlos. In its pages, They presented various analyses and opinions from Venezuelan journalists, and its quality was such that it earned them important recognitions. The truth is that from now on, Carlos Rangel's thinking was much more divergent, just as he enjoyed an intellectual autonomy that few could boast of. A man who opposed the statist, paternalistic, and demagogic views that he denounced as being very present in Venezuelan democracy. He instead proposed to strengthen civil society's influence over the parties, to practice a market economy in Venezuela, to promote a true liberal democracy, and to integrate Venezuela into the Western world without complexes, regardless of whether he was right or not in all his proposals. His ability to adapt the visions of liberalism to the Venezuelan and Latin American scale, always with moderation, as well as his ability not to ignore the idiosyncratic traits of our population. This earned him recognition as one of the most important intellectuals in the Hispanic American liberal field.
In Venezuela, what has our political class proposed to us for the past 25 years and even before that? What are the protagonists of Venezuelan politics proposing to us? Post-Gomecista. They have been proposing to us for 50 years. Social justice, economic development, freeing ourselves from oil dependency, decentralizing power, decentralizing development, giving education to all children, that all Venezuelans eat well, that the country achieves a second national independence, this time economic, and so on and so on. We see our surroundings and realize none of that has been achieved, even though the country has managed large sums of money. And even though these gentlemen have very good intentions, which is what should make you reflect, it's not that they are evil and have done this on purpose. On the contrary, they are democratic, well-intentioned men who have wanted to do good. We're facing a crisis far more serious than people are saying.
Rangel continues his work through writing until he reaches another important milestone in 1982, when he publishes his second book called Third Worldism. Unlike the previous one, this work consisted of a collection of articles and essays in which Rangel reflected on the problems of the so-called Third World. In fact, here he presents a central premise much more incisive than Third Worldism. It took root in Latin America as the dominant ideology among academic, intellectual, and clerical elites, who are largely responsible for the delay in the development of other ideas and doctrines. Written in the context of the last decade of the Cold War, Rangel comes to the conclusion that Third Worldism was the tool through which socialism took political advantage of Latin American underdevelopment. Though this book had less impact, many see it as the best example of Rangel's thought, and in another way striking. During that same decade of the 1980s, he was also the main driving force, along with a group of businessmen and intellectuals, of something unprecedented in Venezuela at that time: the founding of a research center that would promote, disseminate, and defend liberal ideas in the country. In this way, in 1984, the renowned Center for the Dissemination of Economic Knowledge was born, also more commonly known as Center for the Dissemination of Economic Knowledge. It is recognized as one of the most influential in Latin America in this field. At the same time, in that same year, Rangel joined the board of directors of the newly inaugurated Teresa Carreño Theater. Carlos Rangel remained involved in all these activities during the following years, balancing his editorial and television work with his closeness to art. He never stopped his journalistic, critical, and informative efforts. Although the passage of time and entering a stage of greater maturity may have caused him complicated emotions, it was not very apparent, but it is known that Rangel suffered from depressive periods in his later years and was even medicated for it, tragically. His final moment came very soon, and he met the same fate as his father on January 14, 1988, when he was only 58 years old. Carlos Rangel decides to take his own life in his own home under very strange circumstances, and to the surprise of his own family. No one would have imagined during that interview that morning that it would be the last one he would attend. Carlos Rangel never got to see the fall of the Berlin Wall or the breakup of the Soviet Union, which would have been a defining moment for him. He was also unable to fulfill one of his last media commitments. In fact, the week after his death, he was scheduled to moderate a presidential debate between the candidates Carlos Andrés Pérez and Eduardo Fernández. However, his final work, published posthumously, seemed to foreshadow what was to come for both the country and the world. That year, his book called Marx and Real Socialisms was released, in which Rangel presented various criticisms of the variants of socialism that emerged from traditional Soviet socialism. Such was the void he left that just a few days after his death, his friend Jean-François Rebel from France would say, and I quote, "Rangel possessed a rare quality. He had that international vision that makes certain Latin American intellectuals today the most cosmopolitan of our time. Comfortable in English and French as much as in his native language, he thoroughly mastered all three cultures. He was a theorist who put his ideas to the test of the real world's upheavals." Rangel was mourned in the company of many citizens who came to the Valle funeral home in Caracas. And finally, he was buried in the Eastern Cemetery after a procession under the drizzle. This was how the final chapter in Carlos Rangel's life, one of the last intellectuals, ended. Venezuelan intellectuals of the 20th century, he left an invaluable legacy for Spanish-speaking thought, which is now carried on by many academics and writers. His command of language, his seriousness, his presence, and his eloquence made him one of the best interviewers on Venezuelan television and one of the most incisive writers of democracy. His great intellectual background and his dissenting voice were a ray of light among the chorus of voices. Vassals who took sides to justify every measure of the democratic governments, even if they had mortgaged Venezuela's future. A man who dedicated his intellect to dismantling the myths and complexes of the Venezuelan left, and who had to swim against the current. A man who was able to transcend through the strength of conviction and principles, without giving in to what he considered wrong. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and your support means a lot to us by engaging with the channel, commenting, liking videos, and sharing content on social media, WhatsApp, or elsewhere, and by turning on the bell so you get notifications every time we publish new content. So thank you all again, and may God bless you.